a lot of Israel and the world over, and we should see revealed miracles. There shouldn't be any more exchanges. Just everyone who's being kept hostage should come home safe, and the Israeli government should have the stomach to do what it needs to do. Because it's not going to be easy and it's not going to be simple, but they have to have the courage to do what's right. All right, so last week, again, we're going to be going back to this map a lot. This map is phenomenal, and it is integral to what we're trying to accomplish in this Kabbalah course. So last week, if you remember, we talked about three worlds. We talked about Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya, that these are all worlds that are creations, meaning that what is a creation? A creation is something that has a self-identity, a self-concept outside of God. There's a sliding scale of ego within those worlds, meaning a self-concept. You have a world like Asiya, our physical world, where it's easy to live your entire life. 1 second, just letting somebody into the Zoom. You can live your entire life without recognizing God. Then it slides up till you get to a place like Bria, where most of its reality is recognizing the perception of God. It realizes that it's its own thing, but it has an identity which is mission-oriented, which is core-oriented. And that was for the Seder Hishtalshelus, that order of devolution that we talked about last week at length. On the flip side, on the other side of that chart, in the human body, we said that those three worlds correspond to the soul garments, which are thought, speech, and action. And a couple of points that we made is that thought, speech, and action are called the garments of the soul because you could stop doing them. You can't stop thinking, but you could choose what to think about. You could obviously stop talking. You could choose what you talk about, and you could choose what you do, what actions you actually do. So these things are separate from you, and they're outside of your identity, and we have the ability to change the way we behave and the way that we act. Today we're going to go a step higher. We're going to go into the green zone. You can see for lesson 2, it's the middle of the page over here. You got the green zone. By the way, I probably should have asked this beforehand. Does anybody here ever dabbled in Kabbalah at all in the past? Even a little bit? Dabbled. Dip the toe in the shallow end. What's a terminology that you remember? Anybody? I'm sorry? Tzimtzum, okay, that's a good one. What were you saying? Sfirot. Anyone ever heard of the term Sfirot before? Sfirot, the divine attributes. If you've ever been, a lot of Sephardi people have these kind of maps in their home. The classic Kabbalah map is this kind of tree thing with the 9 or 10, sometimes 11, depending on the context, different divine attributes known as the Sefirot. That's actually what we're going to be talking about today. We can talk about the Sefirot. On this side, on the right-hand side, you have the God aspect, and then you have the soul aspect, which is going to be the soul powers. With all of these things, this, in general, the course, we know it's constructed in a way in which we want to learn about these deep Kabbalistic concepts. We also want to try to make them concrete, something that's practical to our lives. They say a story, a Rabbi Tannenbaum, he was sitting in his office, in his study at home, and there were workers outside. They were putting in a new sidewalk right outside his drive. Right outside his drive, they were putting in a new sidewalk in the thing. And while he's trying to study in his office, a bunch of the neighborhood kids come by. And what do kids do when you see wet concrete? Like everybody else, they start writing their names. A couple of them wrote, drew some pictures. Somebody wrote a naughty word, right? And they're making a lot of noise, and they're really driving up the rabbi out, driving him nuts. Second, let me just turn this off. So Rabbi Tannenbaum leaves the study. He storms out to his front porch, and he starts yelling at you kids, good nicks. I'm trying to study, and you're making all this noise. I'm going to call your parents, and if they don't whoop you, I'm going to whoop you. And he's going ballistic at these kids because they're driving him crazy. His wife comes from the other room, and she says, honey, you always talk about how the children are the future, and they're the next chain and the link that dates back to Sinai, and we have to love them and shower them with our affection, and we have to be, we have to treat them with respect because they are our partners in the future of the Jewish people. How are you yelling and screaming at the kids? So everybody says, I appreciate children in the abstract, not in the concrete. Not bad. So we're going to be learning a lot of very abstract concepts. We're getting even more abstract than last week. We're removing the garments of the soul, and we're actually going to go speak about the soul itself. And in order to do that, we're going to talk about the world of Atzilus. Anybody ever heard that word before, Atzilus? Yeah? Okay, beautiful, beautiful. I actually should make another disclaimer. In the on the back of your maps where it has all the key terms, and throughout the book, they have all these key terms, and they kind of writing it with the Sephardic pronunciation, right? Instead of they write Sefirot. So they say Sefirot because I'm an Ashkenazi, and it's kind of, I'm going to say Spheres sometimes, and instead of Atzilut, I might say Atzilus, but just understand that we're talking about the same thing. It's just a slight variation in the pronunciation. All right, so let's jump into it. And in order to do this, we're gonna open with a story. The story that the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Lubavitch, once shared, that there were two gentlemen. There was a wagon driver, there was a wealthy businessman, and this wealthy businessman, to get around, he hired a wagon driver. In Yiddish, they called him a balagola, functionally a taxi cab driver, right? And he would take him from place to place, and they would travel. He had to travel very far to a town called Leipzig. Leipzig was where the Yerida was, where the big fair. You wanted to buy merchandise, you had to schlep all the way to Leipzig. So they're traveling to Leipzig, the two of them, and over the course of their travels, it came Shabbos. It was Saturday. It was Friday afternoon. So they found an inn in a shtetl, in a Jewish town, and they both find lodgings. The businessman gets himself a nicer room because he's a wealthy guy, and the wagon driver, he has a room, and they're both preparing for Shabbos. And because they weren't home, and you don't have to get the family ready for Shabbos, there's nothing to cook. They were ordering takeout, both of them, from the local kretschma, the local inn. They both had extra time on their hands on this Friday afternoon. So the wealthy businessman, he goes to the mikvah, like a good religious Jew does on Shabbos, and he gets dressed for Shabbos in his fancy Shabbos frock. He's a rich dude, so it's a nice frock. And as he's walking to shul, it's an hour till Shabbos. It's very, very early, but he decides he's going to go early to shul in order to say there's something called Shnaya Mikra, which you're supposed to learn something before Shabbos. Might as well do it in shul and have the time. And as he's walking to the synagogue, he happens upon another gentleman who was driving a wagon, and one of the axles of the wagon, one of the wheels got stuck in the mud, right? And the guy has a team of 2 horses, but the wagon's stuck in the mud. And the businessman's, one of the 613 mitzvahs in the Torah is Ozev Tazivima, that if you see a Jew, or anybody actually, not specifically a Jew, stuck on the side of the road, you're obligated to help them out. For instance, if you see somebody with a flat tire, you got to try to help them out. It's actually one of the 613 mitzvahs. And the businessman's like, me, my entire life, I kind of live in a gilded cage. I'm very wealthy. I never have the chance to help somebody with my hands. I write checks, but actually helping somebody with my hands, it's a rare opportunity. So wearing his Shabbos frock and his fancy clothes with his new shoes, his shine shoes, he rolls up the sleeves, and he starts trying to help this guy get his wagon and horse out of the mud. But this guy knows from wagons and mud and horses like I know from ballet. So what ends up happening? After an hour of trying to deal with the horse and the wagon, besides getting a few kicks and destroying his Shabbos clothes and getting all muddy, he got it stuck further into the mud. Because what does he know from helping people out practically? As this is all happening, back on the ranch, the wagon driver also gets ready early for Shabbos, and he has a chance to go to shul early. He gets to shul early. And one of the interesting social things that used to happen in the old country, back in the shtetl, was that the people who did not have a lot of means used to stay in the back of shul. There were always also like itinerant paupers who used to travel around, and they would stay in the back of the shul. And the way it worked was at the end of every tefillah, at the end of davening Friday night, the wealthier people in town would make sure to go invite everybody. Nobody was left in shul without a meal. That's the way it worked. You were able to go to the back of the shul and find somebody to bring home and make sure that everyone is well fed for Friday night. So this wagon driver gets to shul, and he's there early. There's barely anybody in shul, but he sees there's a few of these paupers in the back of the shul. And he's like, back home, by the time I want to invite guests, they're all snapped up by all the wealthy people. And here I have the chance. I'm here in shul early. Let me go to the back of the shul and invite all them back to my hotel room. And he does. He invites all a dozen paupers. He invites them to Friday night dinner. And they all, after davening, so the sexton, the shamish, he's the president of the shul. He goes to the back of the shul and tries to make a shidduch. He tries matchmaking the poor people with the wealthy people to take them home for the Friday night meal. And they said, we're actually all taken care of. There's a very generous guy from out of town. We're all going to his hotel room, and we're going to have a wonderful Shabbos meal. They come to the balagala, the wagon driver's hotel room, and what did he have already? Right? He wasn't a wealthy guy. He bought a couple of pieces of filter fish, some kugel. There wasn't much. They all left Friday night hungry. Right? And the leftovers of the rich guy could have fed the entire town for another week. So both of these gentlemen tried to do good deeds, right? They both did mitzvahs. There's a mitzvah in the Torah to help somebody out in time of need. If somebody has a flat tire, you got to help them out. You got to do what you need to do. If somebody's hungry, you have to try to feed them. Right? Abraham, the first Jew, was famous for inviting guests. But what was their mistake? What could the wealthy businessman could have done? He said, "Oh, there's a wagon stuck in the mud. There's actually a guy back in my hotel room. I know him very well. He's an experienced wagon driver. He has 30 years of experience. We'll get you in and out, no problem. All right? Call AAA. It's not a big deal. Be smart about it." And the wagon driver, if he sees all these people who need a meal, he could have said, I'm actually traveling with somebody, and he has a lot of means, and I know that he bought a lot of food for Shabbos. So the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, when he said the story, he quoted his great-great-great-grandfather, the first Rebbe of Chabad, the Alter Rebbe, and he said that these neshamas atoim, these farblonjete neshamas, these lost or mistaken souls, when they came up to heaven, the angels are like, "What happened over here, guys? Something got mixed up. There was some mixed wires." And they had to come back, but they had to be reincarnated. And if you want to know about more reincarnation, we could refer back to last course, last spring. All right. So there's a basic question that we all have. I would like to know, most individuals would like to know, what are you here for? Every Jew has to do all the mitzvahs, right? Every person has to try to do as much good as possible, but there should be certain things that we focus on specifically. How do we know what our mission is in life? How do we know what we should be focusing on, what we should be harnessing? My internet's stable. Okay, sorry about that. Karen, my computer said the connection isn't stable. Are you hearing us? All right.
Yes, I am. Thank you. Good morning, Rabbi.
So again, to answer that question, we're going to learn about the koiches hanefesh. Koiches hanefesh are one of the key terms we're going to learn today. On page 40, key term 2.1. The koiches hanefesh. Here they're defining it as the soul's 10 attributes that are broadly divided into two categories: intellect and emotion. So we're going to have two parallel discussions, like we're going to actually be having every single class in this course. There's a discussion about the divine and a discussion about the soul, about the human soul. And like we talked at length last week, one of them, they each pattern the other. The divine is constructed in a way that the human psyche can't appreciate. And through studying the human psyche, we could also understand more about God Almighty. Before we jump into actually talking about Atzilus and all these wonderful abstract concepts, does anybody have anything they'd like to clarify before we move on? Look at that. Again, batting 1,000. Unbelievable. Okay.
Intellect. Is that part of the soul?
We're gonna talk about it as we go. Okay. At the end of the class, that should be answered. And if it's not, we will clarify it. Okay. So let's begin with a question. And it's actually a question that was that's been asked by Jewish theologians and philosophers since the beginning. Can you ascribe any attributes to God Almighty? Can you say that God is kind, that God is wise, that God is powerful, that He's mighty? Can you say any of those things about God?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So we're going to read a couple of texts, and I'm going to ask you that question again after two sets of these texts. All right. So Barbara, if you don't mind, on page 42, we are going to jump right ahead to text 3. We're not going to be reading all the text inside because, frankly, we don't have the time. But I always encourage you to go back and read them when you do have the time.
The world of
the text 3 on page 42, where it says Proverbs 3:19. Yeah. Yeah.
God with wisdom founded the earth, with understanding established the heavens, with His knowledge the depths he split.
Barbara, could you also read text 4?
7 attributes. Unto you, God, is greatness and power, beauty, and triumph and splendor. For all in heaven and on earth is yours. Unto you, God, is kingship.
We're actually going to go through all these attributes later on, what exactly they specifically mean. You might have noticed that the first verse talked about God's intellect. It said, the expression was wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. In Hebrew, that's chachma, bina, and das. By the way, just to put in your back pocket, that's what the acronym for the word Chabad is. Chachma, bina, and das. The Chabad philosophy is about harnessing your intellect, your chachma, bina, and your das. And a little bit later on, we'll talk about the difference between all three of those. It's about harnessing those for a higher purpose. That's what Chabad philosophy is all about. The next text 4, ascribes to God 7 other attributes. You got greatness, power, beauty, triumph, splendor. All in heaven and earth is considered an attribute. Actually, we'll talk about it a little bit later. And finally, kingship. So after these two texts, if I repeat that question, can we ascribe attributes to God Almighty? pretty definitively, we see that the text, we're not ascribing it, the text say it, right? The sainted text, we have one from Chronicles, one from Proverbs, and it says very clearly that God is kind, mighty, and wise. Okay, that seems pretty clear. However, on the flip side, Beatrice, let's read text 5. And just parenthetically, this text is from the Maral of Prague. Anyone ever heard of the Maral before? The Maral is famous for, according to legend, building the golem, right? The Maral of Prague, Rabbi Lowy. Beatrice, if you don't mind, text her.
Refer to God as the God, the Holy One, blessed is He, as opposed to the intelligent one, blessed in Him. For God's true self is unknowable. All that we know about God is that He is detached from and beyond every form of principality and any existing entity. It is therefore appropriate to refer to God as the Holy One. The term Kadosh describes an entity that is transcendent. Indeed, God is
Pshitut,
how do you say it?
Peshitut, or Pshitus.
Peshitut, the ultimate simplicity.
So the Maral makes a very interesting point. If you look in all the texts, all the rabbinic texts from the Talmud and beyond, the main way that our sages refer to God is the Holy One, blessed be He. HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, what does the word holy mean? HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Holy means separate, right? A holy day. Shabbos is a holy day. What are we trying to convey when we say that Shabbos is a holy day? It's separate, right? That's actually why we make Kiddush. We sanctify it at the beginning of the day, and then we make Kabbalah at the end of the day, just that it's separate, it's divided from the rest of the week. A Jewish item can get sanctity because it's separate, it's a little bit transcendent. So the sages, when they refer to God, they always call God HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because God is transcendent. And even though intellect is a very admirable quality, God is more than intellect. Because once you start defining something, the definition, by the way, here's an interesting point. The definition of a definition is that it is limited. In any language that you speak, the definition of a table is what? Something that has a flat surface and 4 legs. But when I say that it's a table, what am I saying? It's not a lamp. Correct? Besides for describing this object, I'm also saying it's not something else. So what the rabbis argue is if that I call God kind, or if I call God wise, I'm saying that God is kind, right? But that's already a definition. I'm giving shape to something. A definition is something that you could use to hold onto something. Every object in our world has limited qualities. That's how we're able to define it. Something that's higher than limitation, we can't define because it has no limitations. There's nothing, there are no borders. In order to call something anything, as a matter of fact, it has to have an end. It has to have a limit. And we believe, Judaism believes that God is transcendent. Limitless. So if God is limitless, how can we ascribe to God Almighty that God is kind, that God is wise, that God is mighty? He's much more than mighty. You can't call God kind. He's much more than kind. You're putting a limitation to God. So this is what we're going to talk about today. This is what Atzilus is. Let's start actually with a parable. When you learn Kabbalah, a lot of times there's always parables. There's a metaphor, and then they're all building on something else. So imagine a super genius. Let's pick Isaac Newton, right? So Sir Isaac Newton was famous for universal gravitation, correct? So imagine Sir Isaac Newton is invited to a high school classroom of normal high school everyday kids, and the teacher invites him to come lecture to the students. So if Isaac Newton walks into this classroom and he starts explaining his theory of universal gravitation, the way he understands it, the way it exists in his mind, what are the kids going to get out of that conversation? Less than nothing, right? Less than nothing. Like Barbara's saying, they won't understand what he's saying. They'll also get bored by it, which in turn will turn them off from the whole idea of studying science in a more productive way. So Isaac Newton has a choice to make. He could, if I want to relate to these kids, I could talk to them about how, I grew up in somewhere in England, right? I think he grew up in England, right? Yeah. So you could talk about, I also went to high school and I used to get up these type of shenanigans and I used to like eating that kind of cheeseburger or whatever, right? Then he could relate with the students. But then he's not actually giving them anything, correct? There's nothing Newtonian about that conversation. He might as well be anybody else. But because Sir Isaac Newton was an actual, true, dyed-in-the-cloth genius, So if he has to have this conversation, what should he do? What would be the most productive thing for him to do? Sit down and think. What is one aspect of the universal gravitation that I can, dumbing down is probably the wrong word, that I could limit, I could diminish, I could focus in on, give these kids something, give them a parable. And they could understand that from this parable, there is a metaphor. And from this metaphor, maybe one day they'll be able to actually grasp what I tried to give over to them. When he walks into that classroom and he brings that apple, right? He drops the apple on his head, on one of their heads. So they see something about the universal gravitation. So is this conversation that he's having in the classroom, is it a step down for Isaac Newton? It is, right? Most of this, first of all, in his own mind, he's so much more than that. And generally, when he lectures, he writes for the most prestigious journals, and he lectures to university, other professors, geniuses like himself. So he's able to express everything that he knows, everything that he understands, the way he understands it. So him being in that classroom, it's a bit of a step down because it's more limited. But is it Newtonian? Is it his ideas? 100%. It is not separate from him. It is part of his intellect. He's just honing it down. He's defining it. He's putting parameters that are easily graspable by those kids. Those kids could put their arms around it and hold on to something because he's limiting it in a certain sense. And what's interesting is if you really think about it, if Newton was not an actual genius, right? If he was very, very, very bright and he understood universal gravitation, but he would not be able to explain it to a high school student, that means he's lacking in his wisdom, correct? Because if, let's say when I started preparing this class, right? I grasped the idea of Atzilus, but I can't sit here and talk to you about what Atzilus means to me and to use words, not the same, not just the words that I see in the book, words that I myself can frame in a way that I hope I'll be able to convey to you. If I can't do that, and I just repeat what's written in the books, did I truly understand it? No, because it's limited. I don't have the full, total, all-encompassing understanding of this object, of this topic. Somebody who truly understands something, somebody who's truly wise, is able to also explain it to a 5-year-old. Maybe in a little bit more of a limited way. But if you can't do that, that means you're limited in your understanding.
Because God is limitless. Man who wrote this is limited. How could he possibly know?
Do you know what the word, I'm sorry for cutting you off, do you know what the word Kabbalah means?
Yes.
It means received. This is wisdom that we received from Sinai. Judaism believes that there was a revelation at Sinai, and part of the revelation at Sinai was given over the mystical, esoteric aspects of the Torah, which is what the Kabbalah is. So God explains to us in these mystical, esoteric concepts ways for us to understand. And okay, so if we said that God is only limitless, that God did not have the capacity for limitation, what are we effectively saying? We're saying God is only infinite. And God does not have the capacity for finitude. Is that a word? Finitude. Okay, we're going to call it, yeah. If we say that God can only be infinite, but cannot be defined in a certain way or choose to be defined, then we're also putting a limitation on God. Correct? And now, I'm going to ask you to read text 6. This is one of probably the foundational passage from the whole Zohar. Text 6 on 45, yes.
It's exalted above all the exalted, hidden from all the hidden ones. No thought can grasp you whatsoever. You are the one who has brought forth 10 ornaments, which we call the 10 Sifriot, to direct concealed worlds and revealed worlds.
So going back to that question that we asked earlier, can we ascribe any attributes to God Almighty? We had one text that said, yes, all those, we had two texts, I'm sorry, that said you can't ascribe all those things. We had another text that said, no, God is the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the transcendent one. So which one is right? Which one is it? Is God attributable or is God transcendent? And the answer is yes, right? The answer is yes. Back to another joke. Again, a rabbi and his wife. 2 litigants walk into the rabbi's office. Litigants. 2 people who have an argument walk into the rabbi's office. Okay. 2 gentlemen walk into the rabbi's office, and they each lay out their, like in Yiddish we say taina, their argument. And so the rabbi listens to the first guy and says such and such and such. The rabbi strokes his long white beard. He says, "You're right." The next one has his turn to lay out his argument. The rabbi's sister, he thinks, strokes his long white beard. "You're right." So the Rebbetzin hears from the other room. She bursts into the door. She says, "Rabbi, they can't both be right." The rabbi strokes his long white beard. "You're right." So is God transcendent, or can we ascribe attributes to God? The answer is yes, it's both. In this text 6 from the Zohar, we have 2 paragraphs. The first one said that God is the exalted one. You exalted above all exalted ones. No thought can grasp you whatsoever. Less machshavat tfisa beklal. This is referring to God as he manifests in the limitless fashion, where God is completely and totally undefinable. We can't even say that God is mighty, that God is wise, because he transcends the idea of mighty, he transcends the idea of wise, because that calling something mighty or calling something wise is placing a limitation on it. But then the Zohar continues, says the second paragraph, that God then brought forth 10 ornaments that we call the Sefirot, or the Spheres. And these Spheres are the revealed worlds in which God, so to speak, manifests himself in limited, definable attributes. So when we have those verses from the Bible, when we have text 3 and text 4, which ascribes 10 different attributes to God Almighty, that's talking about when God, so to speak, limits himself. Going back to Isaac Newton. God is transcendent. God is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like Sir Isaac Newton, in his own mind, where he has this unfathomable understanding of the laws of physics.
So he can make himself knowable.
Yes.
to man.
God chooses to make himself knowable to man. And we call these 10 spheres, we call these 10 limitations, these 10 attributes, we call them Sephiros. Actually, let's read text 7. Text 7 describes why we refer to them as Sephira. This is from Ramosha Cordovero. We referenced them last week. Some have linked the word Sephira to the word mispar, number, which indicates a state of finitude. That the word Sephira means mispar, which is a number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1 is not 2, correct? 2 is not 3, 3 is not 4. So God, in his lower, this other manifestation, God limits himself to knowable attributes, graspable attributes. Now, key term 2.3 is the word Sephirot on page 46. This idea of God having 10 specific definable attributes. But going back to the parable of Isaac Newton, is that the class that he gives to that high school, that 90 minutes that he's in the classroom with those high school students, it's still Newtonian, correct? It's still his mind, it's still his understanding. He's just presenting it, he's manifesting it in a way that they should be able to grasp it. These 10 Sephiros, are not a separate, distinct entity from God. They are godliness. They're an expression and manifestation of God. It's not like the other 3 worlds that we learned last week that are created beings that have their own self-concept, an ego. These attributes don't have an ego because it's God's chesed, it's God's kindness, it's God's gvura, it's God's might, it's God's chachma, it's God's wisdom. It's Sir Isaac Newton condensing himself to be understood by high school students. Text 8, to that point that we said before, that God has both the infinite and the finite. Text 8, the infinite one is perfect without any flaw. Should you assert that he has infinite power but lacks the power of finitude, you deny his perfection. Saying that God can't limit himself and at the same time be godly is, in a certain sense, condensing God or limiting God. Does anybody have anything they'd like to clarify before we give another, actually, hopefully, example?
The Isaac Newton thing, it just goes back to me, to my thing, thought, speech, and action.
Mhm.
They understood the action, which therefore was what Newton originally thought of gravity. And then he spoke to them, which they didn't understand, but he understood the action. So as man more understands action more so than thought and speech. So that means the limitless of Hashem is the fact that we don't understand him so much, but we understand the actions of people, existence, earth, things like that.
I think that's a very good point. If you notice on the map that we had last week, the very lowest rung in the ladder for the soul is action, because that's what we spend most of our time seeing, concrete things, doing physical things, and we have to slowly, hopefully, progress up that up those rungs. So just to clarify, actually, right now we are right here. We're talking about these attributes. In the word of Atzilus, you have these 10 definable attributes. We're going to talk actually maybe a little bit about why they're in 3 distinct columns. It's actually an important thing why they're in 3 separate columns. I was supposed to have props for this, but part of the props was that I had to cut something out, and I actually, you could ask my mom, I failed kindergarten. I didn't make it, I think, more than a week. She likes to talk about it once in a while. So here we have on the screen. So we're just using the computer instead because I didn't want to have to take a scissor and paper. It's too much for me. So we have on the screen, we have a blank. Imagine that this is a blank white paper, right? Does it say anything on the paper? Doesn't say anything at all. So you could take a marker, and write the word Sefirot on the paper, correct? So now, is the word Sefirot part of the paper? No, it's something that's imposed onto the paper. The ink is being written on that white paper. So it's a separate entity. That is not God's connection and relationship to the Sefirot. That would not be accurate. A more accurate representation using this white paper is taking another paper and not invisible ink, taking a cutout on another paper and blocking everything out besides the word Sefirot. Because the white paper could be anything, right? The white paper, you could choose to do anything at it. The possibilities are literally endless as far as your imagination can go. But if you impose upon it, you put a frame, another piece of paper that blocks out everything but the word Sefirot, you see the Sefirot. It emanates forth. It's a manifestation of the word Sephiros. So similarly, this world of Atzilus, these 10 Sefirot, are not a creation that God makes outside of himself with a distinct identity, with a separate ego. Rather, it's just a manifestation of God's limitlessness in a limited manner. His infinite in the finitude. Did I get that right? Okay. Yes. All right. So there's a text over here, text 9a, which talks about how all the Sefirot cannot be called creation because they are not created beings. To be created, we talked about last week, a creation, the fundamental aspect of a creation, is having a sense of self, having an identity that is outside of God. This Chachma, God's supernal wisdom, is God's supernal wisdom. It doesn't have its own distinct identity. Think of it this way. Last week we talked about thought, speech, and action. We said that's the parallel for those three worlds, the created worlds. And we said thought, speech, and action are called the garments of the soul. Correct? Why? Because the garments of the soul are obviously distinct from you, and they're interchangeable. You could take them off, and you hang it in the closet. It is not you. Nobody would say your clothing is you. But my arm is part of me, right? But is my arm me? No, it's integral to me. I can't separate myself from it, but it is not me. There's a story that they share of the third Chabad Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the Tzemach Tzedek, and he was raised by his grandfather, the first Chabad Rebbe, Reb Shneir Zalman. Reb Shneir Zalman had a daughter, and she died very young, leaving an orphan boy, who was the Tzemach Tzedek. And one day when the Tzemach Tzedek, Menachem Mendel, was about 5 or 6, he's sitting on his grandfather's lap, and his grandfather asks him, Vu is Zayda? Where is Zaydi? So the Alter Rebbe had a very long white beard, so the kid grabs the long white beard, he says, Da is Zayda, here is Zayda. So the Alter Rebbe says, no, that's Zaydi's beard. Vu is Zayda. So the kid grabs the Alter Rebbe's hand, and he says, Da is Zayda, here is Zaydi. And Zaydi says, no, that's Zaydi's hand. He puts his hand on the Alter Rebbe's heart, on his grandfather's heart. He says, Da is Zayda, here is Zayda. The Rebbe says, no, that's Zaydi's heart. And the kid goes like 5-year-olds do. He wanders off and does his own thing. The Alter Rebbe sits down to study or whatever he was doing. And a couple of minutes later, he hears a cry from the other room. Menachem Mendel says, Zaydi, Zaydi. And the Alter Rebbe comes running in. What's wrong? What's the matter, Tatel? He says, oh, Da is Zayda.
Yes.
Right? There is Zayda. You're not your hands. You're not your heart. You're not. It's integral to you, but it's not you. So these 10 Sephiros, we're going to call them godliness. They are not God. They are godliness. They are divine. They are godly, but they're not actual. They're not God, so to speak. The godliness. It's higher than the created worlds because it's integral. It's part of God himself. It's not a separate, distinct entity, but it's not God. So just like your clothing are separate, but then you have your body, but that's not you. But nobody would say that your body is you. Any questions? Want to let that sink in a little bit?
I'm just trying to understand, he comes running in. And
He comes.
It says, there's Zadie, so what?
Because Zaidi, this is an expression of Zaidi that he cares for my grandchild. That he cares for his grandchild. That's Zaidi. Yeah, that's it's Zaidi's coming running. Yeah, part of Zaidi is his connection to his grandchild. That's a big part of Zaidi's identity. Yeah, his love for that grandchild. That's true. That's true. But the action is a manifestation of yours. Yeah.
Express.
Yeah. That's the only way we can interact with the world around us. That's why we have those souls. That's why we have the garments. The garments are like the tools that we use to interact with and manipulate the world around us. Right? That's why we have to have both. If we only had these attributes,
But it's the only way he could know his Zadie is that his Zadie kept running in. If his Zadie stayed in the other room.
so you know what's
that's not
interesting.
Zadie.
Why is that true? Because he was 5 years old. When he gets a little bit older and he gets a little bit wiser, he's able to understand his connection to Zadie, even without Zadie actually going and bringing him a chocolate chip cookie. Right? When he's 5 years old, Zadie needs to come running. I could see Zadie caring for me. When he gets a little bit older, I could understand that Zadie loves me without that actual physical act. Correct?
What would be the answer? The person being asked that question, but what is the correct answer? then?
Who are you?
Yeah,
The way that right now, the way we're talking about it, we're going to actually go higher levels for purposes of today's class 2 out of 6. For the purpose of today's class, it's your intellect and your personality. Your Chabad, your Chagas, your Nehim. Your 10 koichos hanefesh, your 10 soul powers, which we're going to jump into. Actually, right now, we'll jump into right now. Actually, in a little bit. The way we're defining soul is your Chabad, your intellectual properties, and your Chagas and Nehim, and your emotional qualities. Your intellectual and your emotional qualities, both. That's how we're defining the soul right now. Because we're in the world of Atzilus. This is only step 2. We're going to keep going higher and higher and deeper into defining the soul, into trying to explain God. Just something that you might want to think about when you have time. On page 50, we have the ladder of prayer. The Kabbalists tell us last week's parsha, just yesterday's parsha, actually, we read about Jacob's ladder, correct? So the Kabbalists say how many rungs were in the ladder of Jacob? There were 4 rungs, which represent the 4 worlds. Atzilus, the world we're talking about today, and Bria Yitzir Asiya, the worlds that we talked about last week. And when a Jew prays, the Kabbalah tells us, you're supposed to access that sulam, that ladder, the Jacob's ladder is supposed to be, your prayer is supposed to be Jacob's ladder. It's a progression from the lowest world to the highest world. How that actually works out, you can look in page 50, they have a beautiful infographic talking about that. He asked, how would we answer that question about who you are? As for today, the purposes of today's lesson, you are defined by your soul powers, your sefirot, so to speak, your intellectual and your emotional attributes. That's what we're going to find it for today. Yeah.
Hold that question, please.
It's an important one. It's really what it's all about. So we're going to talk about now, we're going to flip to this side of the map. We're going to talk about man now. We're going to talk about the 10 sefiros, the way they're manifest in a human being. And we're going to jump a little bit out of order. So if you could join me on page 62, we're going to talk about all 10 of these attributes, but we're going to do it pretty quick because we're not going to have time to go through all of them in full detail. So on page 62, you see that infographic? I want to make sure. Page 62. 62 and 63, yeah. So first you have the cognitive attributes. You have Chachma, Bina, and Das. They're all cognitive. So they're all intellectual. What's the difference? So here they define Chachma as wisdom. But what does that actually mean? So Chachma, a good way of thinking about Chachma is, if you ever read a comic, a cartoon, and somebody gets an idea, that first flash of inspiration, there's a light bulb that goes off. Eureka, right? Eureka, which goes off. That's Chachma, that first flash of innovative brilliance. A new idea, creativity. Actually, that's a good way. Yeah, they say creative, right? So Chachma is the capacity to be creative. That's one way of understanding the world, using your cognitive abilities. Then you have Bina. Bina is more analytical. It's more logical. It's more organized. I have that idea, right? That first flash of inspiration. Bina is kind of fleshing it out, explaining it and understanding it in a way that is more fleshed out, that makes more sense. So somebody who has Bina, somebody who is a Bina person, is logical, organized, studious. Then finally, in the cognition, the last step in our intellectual properties is not Das. Das is knowledge. What's the difference between Das and Chachma and Bina? Das is when I make an idea something concrete, something that matters, something that's real. There was a professor who lived in the 20th century. His name was Bertrand Russell. Really, really big deal. He won a Nobel Prize. I think he won the first Jerusalem Prize. very important person. I'm sorry, from England, yeah. And he was both a professor of philosophy and ethics, and also a professor of math, a mathematics professor. And once, this is according to legend, they say that once he got mixed up into something that was not super ethical. It was embarrassing what he did. It did not befit a man like Bertrand Russell. So one of his colleagues says, Professor, you spent your whole life talking about ethics, telling people how the best way to live their lives, and here you did something that's incredibly unethical. How could this be? He says, I teach trigonomics and I'm not a triangle. So you can know something, but without das, it's making it something real. You ever see a doctor smoke a cigarette? Right? They know what it's doing to them. They can actually explain to you on a molecular level what each cigarette's going to do to them in that moment, but it's not concrete yet. It's not really real. So Das is taking this first flash of brilliance. Maybe it's even a developed idea. Das is making it something that's real, something that's true, something that you could not actually touch because it's in the intellect, but something that matters. Now we're going to jump into the emotional attributes. These are actually going to be the three things that we talk about the most today. This Chesed, Gvura, and Tiferes. So Chesed is kindness, Chesed is generosity, being extroverted, optimistic. Gvura is strength, and the way that manifests itself in emotions, that's the idea of being disciplined. Gvura is about discipline and being exacting. Being frugal, that would come from Gvura. Then Tiferes is beauty. Why is Tiferes beauty? Because Tiferes is a blend of the two. If you look at our maps over here, by the emotive qualities, we have Chesed on the right, you have Gvura on the left, and Tiferes is kind of in the middle. Because Tiferes is a blend of the two of them. Do we see that on the map? Chesed, Gvura, and Tiferes? And I'll explain the difference between Chesed, Gvura, and Tiferes more or less. Of the Chesed and the Gvura. Chesed is kindness. Yes. That's going to kind of throw us on a tangent, but yeah, 100% Barbara. And you'll notice that the next four are actually kind of all subdivisions of Chesed, Gvura, and Tiferes. Chesed, Gvura, and Tiferes are the dominant, more all-encompassing emotional attributes, and the next four are kind of spin-offs or annexes, however you want to call it, of Chesed, Gvura, and Tiferes. So it's important for us to know. Actually, let's talk about Chesed, Gvura, and Tiferes a little bit more at length. So Chesed is kindness. It means providing without limitation. Chesed, I want to give. I just want to give. Chesed doesn't really care about the recipient standing. Does this person deserve it? It doesn't really matter to me because I want to give. Like Barbara mentioned, think about Abraham. Abraham was Chesed. He was kindness. He was the personification, the greatest example of a walking kindness person. What's interesting, one of the most famous stories with Abraham was that at the age of 99, he has his circumcision, he has his bris milah, and 3 days after his circumcision, it's boiling hot in the desert, and he's bothered that there's nobody for who to give. He just wants to give. Abraham, whoever this person is, it doesn't matter if they deserve it, whatever, man. I just want to give. It's important to me to give. If the person doesn't deserve it, they do deserve it, doesn't matter to me. Gvura, strength, is looking at the person. Do you deserve to get this, or you do not deserve to get it? If you earn it, we'll give. If you don't earn it, we won't necessarily give. Tiferes, which we define as beauty, is a blend of the two. Because what is beauty? Why is Tiferes beauty? Why is a blend beauty? Because any painting, any piece of music has to be a blend of disparate attributes. If a music was the same note over and over and over again, it would be horrifying. It would be terrible. A painting can't be one color. It has to be different shades of many colors. So Tiferes is, I look at the recipient and I understand that maybe he doesn't deserve, but I empathize with them. I understand why they're in that situation. And because I empathize with them, I'm going to override the fact that they don't deserve and give to them anyways. Because I'm connecting with them, I understand why they are the way they are, and I want them to have, despite the fact that they might not necessarily deserve it. The Talmud actually tells us, talking about Chesed, Gvura, kindness versus strength, the Talmud gives us an incredibly famous example. I am sure that 95% of you have all heard the story before. Of 2 individuals in the Talmud that Kabbalah constantly refers to as personifications of the Chesed versus the Gvura. The Talmud tells us that one day, somebody walks into a Beis Medrash, walks into the study hall, and he meets a man by the name of Shammai. And he says, Shammai, he famously says, teach me the whole Torah while I stand on one foot. And what does Shammai say? scram, run away, get out of here, leave me alone. This guy goes to Hillel and he says, teach me the whole Torah while I stand on one foot. What does Hillel say? Sure. What you hate done to you, don't do to others, right? The origin of the golden rule. So Kabbalah tells us that Shammai was the Gvura guy. First of all, who was right in this situation? Was he? If you think about it, Shammai was also right. Somebody walks into your shul, says, teach me the whole Torah on
You
one
don't
foot.
say scram.
Okay, he didn't actually say scram. That was me. I'm sorry. Actually, he didn't say scram. You're coming to me and you're telling me teach you the whole Torah on one foot. Are you out of your mind? It's chutzpahdik. It's incredibly inappropriate. You're not being respectful. Shammai was a man of discipline. You want to learn Torah, you have to be disciplined. You want to connect, you want to join this project we call Judaism, you have to be a disciplined person. It's going to take a lot of hard work. You have to. Shammai was exacting with himself, but he was also exacting with others. His exactitude, his gvura for himself meant that he grew more and more within himself, trying to make himself a better person, but he also demanded that from other people. If you want to be my student, you have to be disciplined. You have to raise yourself up. I'm not going to be here force-feeding you and just giving to you if you're not willing to learn. Hillel, on the other hand, was, it's all gravy, baby. Just take. We have this light, we have this love, and just take. You deserve, you don't deserve, I don't really care. We're just going. Hillel was willing to overlook other people's shortcomings because he was a chesed guy. That's the way he lived his life.
It's like go and study.
Of course, you do have to study, but the first thing is have. The first thing is take. Yeah, so again, you have chesed, gvura, and tiferes. Tiferes is the blending of the three of both of those things.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
You have dot, and then you have your personalization. It's not the same thing.
So personalization would be, what does this thing mean to me?
So how's that?
Because I learned this new idea. What does it mean to me? Think back to that doctor, and they're smoking a cigarette. He's smoking a cigarette. He went to medical school for, I don't even know how long it was. He has all this debt, and he knows everything about cigarettes, what it does to the body, but he never personalized it, so it doesn't mean anything to him. He never took that knowledge and made it something real to himself.
So which is it? Is it knowledge or person?
I'm sorry?
Is this a definition of this?
It's not the definition of that. It's the way it manifests itself in the human being. This side is going to be the divine, and this side is the human soul.
Oh, okay.
Malka? All these intellectual attributes themselves lead into the thing. It's all part of one chain. Oh, sure. Jane, can you pass that down to Jimmy, please? So, flipping back to the divine, the world of Atzilus has those 10 Sephiros, and everything in this world comes from one of those 10 Sephiros. Everything in this world, according to the Kabbalists, they were somehow able to match up different things in this world to one of those 10 attributes. They actually say that water is chesed. How? I don't know. Ask a Kabbalist. But everything in this world comes from these 10 attributes. There's only 10 of them, correct? But each thing has a different blend of all 10 of those. There's a dominant thing, but they all come from one of those things primarily. By the way, parenthetically, the Kabbalists say, why can't you have milk and meat? What's the problem having milk and meat? Who really cares about milk and meat? Or there's another mixture that Jews are not allowed to benefit from. Linen and wool and linen. So we don't understand it logically. But the Kabbalists tell us that meat comes from chesed, and milk comes from gvura, and they shouldn't be mixed in a certain way. That's the origin of this mitzvah. And linen comes from gvura, and wool comes from chesed. They shouldn't be mixed. This is what the Kabbalists say. Just something to put away. In these mitzvahs, for those mitzvahs. Generally, you do want to mix, but that's the Kabbalah says those mitzvahs. So a healthy. So I'm sorry. So we're going to talk about how that changes for the human being. This is just what the Kabbalists say. Honestly, I don't really understand how wool would translate into gvura. Yes. But they want, so the way the Kabbalists say about these mitzvahs, that we have to at least understand that there's two separate contexts, two separate attributes. There's a lot of other things in this world that we do mix chesed and gvura. Let's say water, it says, comes from chesed, and plant life comes from gvura. They obviously mix one with the other. But there's certain things that God, so to speak, according to the Kabbalists again, this isn't the normal way of understanding the mitzvah. The way the Kabbalists say, there's certain things that God gave us to understand that there are separate things and they are distinct. in many ways, we do mix them together, and we're going to talk about more in our personal lives what that would mean.
So,
One second.
so
Barbara, we'll talk. David?
when I'm looking at this chart, generally speaking, is the general goal to use the word that's a way of life, but there are certain times where you need only Dora and only benefit, so you don't necessarily have to be following
So
the same-
really, we should be answering this question more towards the end, but we'll talk about it just very briefly right now. Generally, we do want to blend. Yes, we are made up of all 10 of these. We have all 10 of these, and we want to make sure that we're using all of them, generally. But there are times that you need to access one versus the other. The Rebbe actually said during the Yom Kippur War, the Rebbe said that the Tiferes is great because it's a blend of both severity and strength and kindness. And so when God manifests himself to the world in such a way, then it's great and it's wonderful. But the Rebbe said during a time of war, when people are in danger, we want only chesed, just the kindness. Don't think about whether people deserve it or not. Just do kindness without thinking about people deserving it or not, because we want just an overflowing of kindness. People. Okay. No. We'll talk. Okay. So again, you have the 10 attributes. Anyone here ever designed anything on a computer? Ever? No? So on computer, there's something called RGB. There's RYB. The computer graphics has 3 colors. There's red, yellow, and blue, right? But from red, yellow, and blue, you make functionally infinite amount of colors, because it depends how much red you put in, how much yellow you put in, how much blue you put in, right? Is that something that makes sense? Yeah. So everything in this world is made up of the 10 attributes, but depending on the blend of those different colors, how it ends up looking is going to be very different with different things. Okay. So now, why it's important for us to learn about Atzilus, for us to learn about these 10 attributes, to learn about this realm of godliness where God is defined and limited in certain ways. So one reason why it's important is because this might help us answer the question that we started off class with. How am I supposed to know what my specific goals are in life? How am I supposed to know this? So one way to do this, Kabbalah tells us, is to look at your soul. Look at your soul makeup. Look at your personality and your character traits. Your soul, while it is comprised of all 10 of the spheres, there's going to be one dominant sephira. There is going to be something that's a dominant personality trait with yourself. You could look in that map, the infographic that we talked about on page 62, and you could circle the things that you identify with, and then you might be able to understand what the root of your soul is, which one of these sephiras you most identify with. Lisa, could you read text 14, which hopefully will help us understand this?
Okay.
Text 14 on page 60.
60.
Yes, we're jumping all around today.
It is well known that souls are rooted in the 10 spheros. By examining our personalities, it is possible to identify the individual sphere that serves as the root in a person's soul. We readily observe that intellect is dominant in some individuals, whereas emotions are dominant in others. This phenomenon indicates that some souls are rooted in the intellectual spherot of Atzilus and others in its emotive spherot. As far as individual spherot are concerned, we know that some individuals display a dominating strain of Netzach and others a dominating trait of Chesed, and so on.
So if you want to know how to focus your energies, this can mean everything from what kind of career path you want to pursue, parenting style, what you should do with your free time. We all need a volunteer to help the community, correct? But how should I focus where should I focus my time? So some people are going to be very analytical. Somebody who's very analytical, what should they do with themselves? Sit and learn a lot of Torah, because you have an analytical mind, and you are more readily able to connect with the Torah. You have some people who are like Tiferes, they have a lot of empathy. They're an empath. Somebody like that could be a counselor, right? We have a few counselors here, and the most important thing for a counselor is to be an empath. So if you feel that you're somebody who connects with this idea of empathy, so it's a good idea to use that capability, use that strength, and use it to understand what your function is in this world, your specific function. Now, like those gentlemen, remember the first story we said, the wagon driver and the businessman, they both have to do all the mitzvahs. That's true. You have to be kind to others, and you also have to help people when their wagon gets stuck in the mud. But what's a more useful use of my time? If I am somebody who is a doer, which is actually Malchus kingship, because that means dominion. I have the ability to enforce my will on the world around me. If I'm that kind of person who's a Malchus guy, who's an action person, actually do the action, right? You're that kind of person. Some people are thinkers, and let's let them think. They should not be necessarily put in charge of making sure that the shul's plumbing works. Because when you want something done, you got to find somebody who's an actor, an actor, somebody who makes things happen, an action man. If you want somebody who's good at giving advice, you need somebody who has a blend of both the personalization aspect, but also has empathy, can understand where somebody else is standing. Somebody who's only kindness, who's just a giver, they should do something like, let's say, feed the poor, because it really shouldn't matter whether they deserve it or not. We're just making sure that they're fed. But when it comes to something like counseling, they might not be the best person, because for them, nobody has any faults, nobody has any flaws, and there's no reason to focus on it. Let's just give, let them have, let them go, right? There is an idea that I think Judaism would agree with, that giving $5 to somebody who's on the side of the road might not be the best thing, because we don't know what they're going to use it for. Go into the store and buy them a burger, right? To make sure that it's being channeled. Because chesed would just give them, do whatever you want with the money, because you should have. I don't care about your instincts, what your flaws are. So everybody has to understand what they're best at. And honestly, the only person who could help you figure out what you're best at is yourself, right? It is important to try to find a guide and a mentor, somebody who could really talk to, but the only person who could answer what you are best at, who could really understand your soul's root, quote unquote, would be yourself. Barbara, you ever tried?
I don't know how many people really know themselves.
Because they don't stop and think, right? To be a mature person, to be somebody who learns Kabbalah, means that you're actually stopping and thinking. Jimmy, could you do me a favor and read text 16, where we have a couple of examples of people who have what you should do if you know what your soul core is.
God provides each individual with a unique set of abilities. Each of us must pursue a divine mission in accordance with our specific abilities and potentials, for they indicate our personal responsibilities in life. Say, for example, that God gave you significant intellectual abilities. It is your duty to utilize those abilities to study Torah and to invest all your energy in this endeavor. True, you are required to serve the other mitzvot and to commit yourself to all obligations shared by all Jews. Nevertheless, since you have a unique attribute for study, you need to be extra particular and passionate about it. Or if you are graced with strong emotional sensitivity, it is your duty to utilize this sensitivity to show love and care to others. This includes bearing Judaism's rich heritage with Jews who never had the opportunity to learn about it, and inspiring them with love for God and love for the Torah. Again, you are also obligated to study Torah and observe the other mitzvot, but your main passion should be reserved for the above stated activities, as indicated by the very fact that you have unique abilities in this area. Perhaps you are pragmatic by nature. You know how to get things done. In that case, your duty is to achieve practical projects. If there is a need to establish an institution for Jewish education, for example, it is your call to put your abilities into practice by actively pursuing every effort to open the institution. If there is a need to solve a particular challenge that inhibits the student's performance, the building is too frigid, the building is cooling, make it your duty to solve the challenge expeditiously. Or perhaps you could effectively alleviate the plight of the poor and homeless, and the like. Certainly, you must also study Torah and act with emotional sensitivity, but your overreaching purpose is to get things done.
So we all have basic Torah obligations, but the question is, what is your unique contribution that you bring to the table? That specific blend of these 10 attributes is something that nobody else has. You were created. There's a line that they say in the name of Rav Nachman of Breslov, that your birthday is the day that God decided the world can no longer function without you. That's your date of the birth, right? So somebody who's born in 2023, there are 7.8 billion people living in the world right now. But God decided that at this point, this specific soul has to come down into this world. And this specific soul is going to be unique. It has its own specific soul print, just like a thumbprint. No two thumbprints are alike. No two souls are exactly alike. And this person is going to have a unique contribution because they have a unique blend of these 10 sefirot, these 10 soul powers. And part of our job in life is to, the best of our abilities, try to understand what our soul print is, what our unique abilities and contributions can be, and use that to better ourselves, better the world around us, and to connect with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with God.
Yeah, Mark Twain said the two most important days of your life are the days that you were born and the day you find out why.
Wow, that's actually great. Another Mark Twain quote, I think this is Mark Twain, that's pertains to what we're saying. He said, be yourself, everybody else is taken. Right? There's only one you, right? And there's only one you because you have a unique blend of herbs and spices that nobody else has. You got to make sure that you use those capabilities to the fullest. There's actually a story. Does anyone ever hear of Piamenta, Avi Piamenta and Yossi Piamenta? There's two Israeli gentlemen. They grew up secular on a kibbutz somewhere, and for some reason they fell into the yeshiva lifestyle. They started learning more Torah. They started getting more observant, and they were getting more involved. They also happened to be rockers, right? Literal rockers. They used to play rock music all the time. And they would go to bars and clubs, first in Israel, then they came to New York. They came to bars and clubs all around the city playing music, right? And as they're getting more observant, more religious, the older brother actually wrote to the Lubavitcher Rebbe and he said, now that we're becoming more religious, bars and clubs are not necessarily a religious Jew wants to spend all their time, or even a large portion of their time. So I'm kind of going to phase that out and just move on with my life. So the Rebbe responded to him that you actually can't. You can't do that. This guy was an unbelievable guitar musician, right? An actual rock musician. For your average yeshiva student to walk into a bar, he's completely out of place. He has nothing to contribute. He shouldn't be there because there's nothing for him to do. He can't help anybody with anything there. But you, Avi Piamenta, God gave you this unbelievable gift to play the guitar. Make sure you use that and you play music. And the guys will see you there. You're wearing a yarmulke, right? And all the guys and girls who are hanging out, they'll see a religious Jew. And he also happens to be awesome. He's great. He's a great musician. And maybe this will give you an opportunity to teach them a little something about a higher purpose. Actually, one of the albums that they have is something called Live at Stubbs. Stubbs is a venue somewhere in the city, right? And the two of them, they're at this bar, this venue in the city. And I'm listening, I listened to this album like a bunch of times. And they're shredding, right? They're tearing the roof. Unbelievable. And in the middle, he stops the song. We're going to take a break now. We're going to go Davar Maariv in the back. Okay? It's unbelievable, right? So for Avi Piamenta, if Avi Piamenta threw away his guitar and just put on a black hat and jacket and sat on their Torah all day, Avi Piamenta's not doing his job because Avi Piamenta needs to play the guitar because it opens doors to help people out that even the greatest rabbi wouldn't be able to do. The Rebbe actually told him, I'm jealous of you because you have this gift that I don't have. That's what the Rebbe said. You're able to access things that I don't have. So if you have a specific ability, and definitely when we're talking about something like cognition or emotional attributes that you could use to help make yourself and the people around you better, we have to make sure that we use it. But on the flip side, I want to make one last interesting point about this specific topic. Text 18. Text 18, we're jumping ahead again to 67, but I just think it's an important point to make while we're talking about identifying our strengths and using them to serve God and become better people. Text 18 says, Shammai would say, make your Torah study a permanent fixture of your daily schedule. Say little and do much, and receive every human with a pleasant countenance. So here you have Shammai, back to Shammai. Shammai, the ultimate guru guy, the discipline guy. So here he says three things. He says, make your Torah study a permanent fixture of daily schedule. That sounds very guru, right? Very disciplined. Make sure that it's permanent and it's fixed. And at minimum, every day at 12:30, I take my lunch break and we're learning Torah. That's very, very guru, very disciplined. Then he says, say little and do much. Be restrained. Again, guru, it's discipline. Don't talk too much. Make things happen. Be exacting with yourself. But the last thing he says is receive every human with a pleasant countenance. Anybody you see, you got to smile. Got to smile at them. Does this sound like Shammai? Does this sound like Shammai? It's not Shammai. Shammai's guru. He's strength, he's discipline. I should smile at you. You don't deserve a smile. If you deserve a smile, I'll smile. No, says Shammai. You have to smile at everybody. Every person you have to greet every person with a pleasant countenance. You would think that Shammai is the type of guy to personalize his greetings to somebody based on who they are and their standing. So the commentaries tell us that Shammai saw Hillel, and he saw that Hillel had success with kindness. Shammai's like, maybe I need to sometimes also access my chesed. Maybe I need to get to the Pharaoh's place and realize that maybe they don't deserve it, but you still have to be giving. And not everybody can be as disciplined as I am, so I can't project my discipline outwards at everybody the same way. I have to also access my chesed, ultimately my Tiferes side, the blend, the beauty. Because we all have default personality traits. We all have certain strengths, And if you have a certain strength, that does mean that you have other qualities that are not necessarily as strong. You could be a big thinker, but you're not super disciplined. Or you could be very disciplined, but you're not giving because you're very disciplined. So we have to make sure that we recognize the quote unquote places that we could, the flaws or the faults, and try to strengthen them as well. Because we have a blend of all of them and we have the capability to access all of them. It might not be as easy, but we still have to make sure that we are accessing them as well. This is a great story. Anyone ever hear of Zusha from Anatolia? Zusha of Anatolia. So Reb Zusha was a very wise man. He used to call himself just Zusha, right? Zusha. And he said, when I die and I stand before God, they won't say, why were you not wise like Solomon? They won't say, why were you not kind like Abraham, strong like Samson? They'll say, why were you not Zusha? Because Zusha is Zusha. There's only one Zusha. And I had the ability to be Zusha. I couldn't be Solomon because that's not, God did not make me to be Solomon. God had a Solomon. But God only made one Zusha. And if I live my life not true to who Zusha is, then I'm not going to be Zusha. So we have to make sure that we understand what we're doing here. It's not an easy thing to discover. Like Barbara said, oftentimes a person can go their entire life and never stop to think, but we have that ability to figure what it is. By the way, actually, before we make another point, does anybody have anything they want to clarify? Wow, guys, I'm impressing myself over here. Okay, actually, you know what? We're gonna play the nigun. By the way, in a couple of minutes, we'll play the nigun so we can think about it, and afterwards it'll be more of a form.
Very deep concepts here and a lot of words that we didn't know. Really? And you're going at breaknecks.
That's what I'm thinking. What do we need? I'm here all day. Malka's gonna pick up Shua, so I'll be here all day. You know what I'm saying? So there's a Kabbalistic text called Sefer HaBahir. Sefer HaBahir. Kabbalistic text, and it says that when Abraham was alive, that supernal trait of kindness goes to God and is like, there's nothing for me to do because Abraham is busy running around doing so much kindness. He supplanted me. There's so much kindness in the world because of Abraham. There's nothing for me to do. So they say a story. There was a guy. His name was Yisrael, and he lived in the old country. He lived in Belarus, and he was an earnest Jew, but a simple Jew. And he goes to Lubavitch. He goes to the third Chabad Rebbe, and he starts listening to him talk. And he's talking about high mystical concepts. He's saying a real Hasidic discourse. And one thing he mentions is that Abraham supplanted the supernal character trait of kindness. That's what, because he was so kind, he was so giving, he was able to access this incredible level and was changing the world with his kindness. And that's the only thing this guy understood from this entire discourse. Didn't understand at all what the Rebbe was saying. It was a lot to swallow, a lot of words that he didn't know, but he took this sentence with him. And he comes back home, and all the people, they're like, no, you were by the Rebbe. What did the Rebbe have to say? He said, honestly, I'm not totally sure. But the Rebbe said that Abraham did so much kindness that he supplanted the supernal trait of kindness. Okay. And then he goes back to his regular life. And he's thinking to himself, I need to do more kindness. Abraham was able to supplant the supernal aspect of chesed, of kindness. I got to try to do something like that too. So he had two neighbors. There were three shopkeepers in in the middle of the town square. He was in the middle, and the guy to his right, the guy to his left. Neither of them had a ton of money, So he said, I can't give a lot of charity. And the guy next to me he's not rich at all, but he also needs to do chesed. So he goes over to him and he knocks on the door. He says, I want to give you the opportunity to do chesed. Why don't you take a loan? Why don't you give me a loan? That'll be chesed and I'll pay you back. I'll be able to pay you back, but this is your chesed that you could give me a loan, a small loan. And they just kept giving each other loans because it's chesed, right? Then the third guy, the guy on the other side of the store, he hears about what they're doing. He's like, this is fantastic. I can't give a lot of charity because I don't have the capability. I'm going to give you a loan. So they had a three-way daisy chain of people giving tzedakah, one to the loans one to another, because they wanted to give chesed. They wanted to do chesed. They wanted to manifest kindness in this world. So if we don't totally understand what exactly my soul print is, and we don't understand all the lofty concepts of Atzilus, what we could walk away with is, at least, that if I bring a little bit more chesed into this world, I am, so to speak, bringing that supernal aspect of chesed and making it something real in this world, which is ultimately the mission of of any person, and particularly a Jew who has a neshama and learns about the neshama, learns about their soul. That I have to make sure that this chesed or even this gvura does not stay theoretical. It's something that becomes practical and something that I can use to impact the world around me, impact the people around me, and pay it forward. Right? It's the same $5 that's going around, but what were they trying to accomplish? It was an expression of their chesed. Does anybody here do any affirmations, or is that too modern? Daily morning affirmations. My sister Adi was telling me that her daughter Asya, well, what's Asya, like 7? So when she was in first grade, her teacher every morning they would all stand up, and it was it's in a girls' yeshiva in Crown Heights. So they would say, I am beautiful, I am smart, I am brave, say affirmations every single morning. And there's this idea, I mean, if you go on Instagram or whatever, there's all sorts of affirmation. There are people that put it on their bathroom mirror, so when they brush their teeth in the morning, I am brave and I am beautiful, and
Stuart Small.
I'm sorry?
Stuart Small, and I'm
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And everything. Yes.
So what's interesting is that the Jewish prayer every single morning actually starts off with a daily affirmation. Is anybody here familiar with the prayer Elikai Neshama? Elikai Neshama. We could actually see it in somewhere in the book. Let me find it. Elikai Neshama. It's in the Berachot, yeah, it's right in the beginning of the prayers. Elikai Neshama. We could find it in our book. Eventually, page text 13 on page 59. So every morning, part of the Jewish prayer service, like Lisa said, it's in the morning blessings. We say, Elikai neshama shenasata bi tahirahi. My God, the soul you placed within me is pure. Ata verasa, you created it. Ata yitzarta, you formed it. Ata nafachta bi, you breathed it into me. So we say about the soul that Ata verasa, you created it, which is the world of Bria. Ata yitzarta, you formed it, you fashioned it. That's the world of Yitzira. Then Ata nafachta bi, you actually blew it into me. That's the world of Asiya. That's the world of action. But ultimately, what's the true definition of the neshama? What is the soul? The first step of the soul is tahoirahi, that it is pure. The first step of the neshama, the first way that we affirm the importance of the soul is that it's tahoirahi, because it comes from the world of Atzilus. It comes from the world of godliness. Because it comes from this world of godliness, this world of Atzilus, so first of all, it's uncorruptible. A soul is uncorruptible. No matter what we do, we could fail, we could fall down, but we always have the ability to access that tahoirahi. We could always access that purity. The core of the soul is pure, ultimately. And even if you could live a long time and you're not doing what you need to do with your neshama, it's always going to be tahirahi. It's always tahira. This also means that because we come from Atzilus, again, we have all 10 of these divine attributes manifested in our soul. We have the ability to access our chachma, our bina, our das, our intellectual capabilities, our emotional capabilities. None of them are closed off from us. We have the ability to use all of them to improve ourselves, to improve the world around us and the people who are around us. And it's important to remember that at the end of the day, it is Tahira Hi. Before we play the niggin, does anybody have a question they want to get off their chest?
I have one thing. People ask about that. Because the example about the doctor not relating to himself, so there's 2 parts. One, to relate himself to the other person, saying a line in the Shabbat every day, but praying. If you'll realize, then you'll return in your heart. So that's that. But there's another part. The Gemara said, why do you say the Havdalah of Mocha Shabbos in the book of Atachan and Das, which is the book of Chachma? Because in my Das, Abdullah Manai. If you don't have Das, you can differentiate between holy and unholy, a weekday and Shabbos and so on. So Das is also to be able to know the difference between this and that. You can be very smart.
Discernment. Yeah, that's true. About Das is also about the discerning between what's important, what's not important, what's holy, what's not holy, what's good, what's not good. That's also part of Das. What's important?
You said about RGB W colors. That's what I do electricity. So
right, they're all
LEDs. So that's how it works. You have the remote control for the color changing. So that's how it's called, RGBW. That when you order it, there's politics in the colors. Which colors are the main? But you mentioned the Moshe Cardeveros. He has a whole chapter about colors. Every color that's against something. So Chesed is basically white. Gevura is like war, blood is that. when you mix white and red, you get yellow.
Yeah.
That's why the smiley face is yellow, because that's the Paris.
Interesting.
Paris is always welcoming.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Right.
Do we want to try the nigun? Should we play the nigun? Where did the slideshow go? It's just the audio.
Oh yes, yes.
Okay, we're gonna do that just for now. There is a lesson video. You find it over here. I think it's pretty good.
Welcome to the second video in our captivating series, where we continue our journey through the mystical realms of the Kabbalistic system. In our previous video, we delved into the worlds of Beria, Yetzirah, and Asiya.
Did we watch the previous video together? Okay, so I'll make sure to add it in the email.
Exploring three existences that feel independent of God. Today, we venture into a divine world. Welcome to Atzilut. To truly grasp the world of Atzilut, let us ponder a basic question about God. On the one hand, our sages refer to God as the Holy One, blessed be He, choosing the word holy to emphasize that God is infinite, transcending specific and definable qualities. On the other hand, the Torah describes God as bearing specific attributes: kind, merciful, compassionate, to name a few. So, which is it? Does God have specific praiseworthy characteristics, or is he beyond any description? Allow me to clarify this through an analogy. Imagine you're a brilliant scientist entering a classroom to convey your theory to a group of teenagers. The problem is that your idea is too abstract and complex for these young minds. So you ponder, rethink, and finally find a relatable detail within your theory that you successfully share with the students. In this example, there are two different levels within your single mind. There's your default mind, operating when teaching your elite students, and a second layer of your mind that produces a simplified version that the teenagers can understand. Here's the crucial point. Both levels are your mind. The Kabbalists use this parable to help us understand a divine truth. Yes, God is infinite and beyond description, but this absolute infinity includes the capacity for finite expression and specific attributes. Why? Because if we were to claim that God lacks this ability, it would imply a limitation, and God is without any limitations. But this only means that God's infinity includes the potential for finite expression. A potential does not imply actual definable attributes. That's why there's a second important step here. Kabbalah reveals that God chose to actualize his capacity to be finite, giving birth to 10 definable expressions known as sephirot, numbered entities. It's like the teacher who doesn't suffice with having the potential to reach young minds, but actually gets into the classroom and relates the deep ideas to the simple minds. That's the mystical secret behind the sephirot. True, they are not God's essence, but on the other hand, they are God's attributes. They don't feel as though they are outside of God. That's why we refer to them as Elokut, godliness. And that's why we call this world Atzilut, which derives from the word Eitzel, meaning together with God. Now, you might be wondering how this relates to us. Our souls originate in Atzilut, and our soul's powers are the mirror image of these 10 divine attributes. Each morning, as we engage in prayer, we remind ourselves of this fundamental truth. The soul you have put into me is pure. We reconnect with our Atzilut identity. This realization serves as a profound inspiration to infuse more spirituality into our lives. It tells us that we possess the power to pursue the path of the divine, and that this is our truest identity. This understanding also empowers us to make a tangible impact on the world around us. Our souls are deeply rooted in Atzilut, a realm of complete divine identity. Therefore, we have the ability to introduce positive change and foster greater awareness of the divine in our immediate surroundings. So let us discover our connection with this divine world and harness the power it bestows upon us. Remember, you are a vessel of divine light, capable of making a profound difference.
Next week, I'm not going anywhere. So if you have any questions, anything's clarified, I'm here as long as you need me to today. But next week, we're going to talk about marriage, infinity, desire, and angels. All right. And it's one idea. Today, we talked about finitude. We learned the new word finitude. And next week, we're going to focus more on the infinite, on the infinity. If you have any questions, if you need anything clarified, please don't hesitate. And because Malka is going to get Shua, right?
Yes.
Okay. So Malka is going to figure out what time. So thank you guys. I'm just going to end the recording 1 second.